Welcome to the Las Vegas Ace event. Today we're talking about spring cleaning your Jira and Confluence. So, kind of intended this as sort of a roundtable, open forum discussion where we might talk about, how we do that. Get some crowdsourced ideas here. For me, and I was just talking about how part of my spring cleaning is actual physical Jira things, which is the swag that I get for Atlassian events and other trade shows, and kind of destashing them over time. Just a couple days ago, we decluttered a bunch of the cups and mugs and things we get from those events, and I took them to a conference over the weekend to hand them out to people who didn't have a water bottle or a coffee cup. So, but let's talk about like other things that you might do to sort of spring clean a bit. I have some ideas about Confluence in particular, but we have Andy, Robert, Rodney have joined us today. I don't know if any of you have thoughts, ideas. I'm sure you do.
I don't know. I usually start with so for me it's always looking at the low-hanging fruit. And in Jira that's always either projects or schemes. You know, projects, seeing which ones are good to go for archiving. Now that server's gone, data center can archive and cloud can archive. So Um, and the easiest way on cloud, I know that you can uh, click in the top right, the administrative cog, and then go to projects, and you can actually go to manage projects, and it'll show you the last time somebody touched a project. So that's always kind of a good reference point.
That is a great tip. Yeah, check in on your languishing projects and archive the ones that aren't needed anymore. And typically that also requires communicating with the project owner or project manager. And for me, sometimes that means um, exposing that people have left the company and we no longer have a project owner for that project, which is always fun because then you got to track people down, right? So it's another good spring cleaning practice of like, okay, at the very least, make sure that all of those projects are owned by a person who's still with the organization, right? Love that.
Yep. Another, and again, it's going to surprise no one that this is a Jared tip, but another of my favorite cleaning tasks to do on the regular is inactive workflows. You make a change, you take a backup, they build up over time, and they're not doing anyone any good. They're easy targets. You don't really have to get approval because they're not the active workflow, and they still take up resources, so they still have impact. So clean them up is always a good idea, and it's just when you get busy, it's easy to forget to go back and do that.
Yeah, but that's a great tip. And while you're in the workflows, make sure they're named nicely, right? Like that's another tip that's part of my cleanup is while I'm going in and doing that workflow cleanup, I also check to see if the names are current because Jira automatically names things, stuff like copy of blah blah blah, copy of blah blah blah, right? And for me, finding those makes my eye twitch. I get frustrated. And Rodney posts here this, and I'm sure this will be in the transcript, but the naming conventions in Jira on the JiraGuy.com article. So That's just from a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, middle of last month. It wasn't that long ago that I published it, but yeah. Someone asked about it, so I got their tips from, again, the experts in the community, the online community leaders. Kind of pulled it all together with some of my thoughts and put it out there. But per your note on naming things, typically when I'm looking at a workflow, a scheme, anything, I want to know what is this for? When was it last touched? Who last touched it? And what is it supposed to do? And the name, because there's not really a lot of greater context there in these schemes. Name is about the only place we have to do all that. So I want to make sure I'm able to identify those things within the name.
Absolutely. Yeah, and, as long as you're logged in, looking at things in the admin, how about those custom fields, right? Like, cleaning those up too, that's another big area for cleanup, and, that can be a little more challenging because the data has to either be moved, like when you find, "Oh, we have 3 custom fields for the same thing," right? 3 custom fields for the client this is related to, or 3 custom fields for the purchase order number, or whatever it is. And then you have to combine all that information. So that can be a more lengthy uh, topic, more lengthy process. So let's see, we've talked about archive your projects, clean up your workflows, clean up some custom fields. What else we got?
I mean, I imagine Angie just sitting there waiting for Confluence to come up. So I'll go ahead and say the needful. My spaces, no matter my best effort, can never stay organized. So going in once a year, once a quarter, however often you could do it, and make sure all the pages are where they're supposed to be. They have the right parents. They're all organized. Even if the pages themselves are a mess, making sure they're at least in a place they could be found easily. World of difference.
Yep. Yep. Tagging.
Yep.
I like to so Confluence is one of those things where it can get so out of hand so fast, right? And for me, one of the things that I like to do is, especially when I'm an admin, I like to try to get information in the hands of the space administrators so that they have a set of best practices, and then all I have to do is just kind of breeze through and see, oh yeah, all these are tagged, oh yeah, these all, follow a similar table of contents, or whatever it is. Yeah. Yeah. What else we have for Confluence? Andy, you are on mute. And
Yeah,
hello,
I had an
Jasmine.
unmute button. Yeah, so Confluence, you already mentioned, make sure that you give the tools to the space admins. Really, a space admin's job, they should know part of their requirements are to review the content that's in their space, whether it be quarterly, semi-annually or annually, to really go through the content in the space, go through that page tree, take a look and see, what's been updated, what's been looked at, what hasn't been looked at. You could run a recently updated macro, but recently updated dashboard macro, right, on a page, and then from there see when the last updates were applied to any pages in a space or under a parent, and get a good idea of what's stale, and take a look at that and determine, it hasn't been touched for a year. Does it require updates, or is it no longer applicable? If it's no longer applicable, archive it, right? Don't delete. Best practices, always archive. If it is still applicable, but it hasn't been updated, assign that page to either the original owner or someone else on the team to go through it. Like, space admin shouldn't have to read every page and make a determination themselves. They should just take a look at the current state and then assign that out, delegate it to people on the team. And that, we do that in our spaces in our organization, unfortunately, only really annually, to take a look through. But what we see from that effort is that a lot of new content that gets created, because what you uncover all the things that are stale, but then you start to realize all the things that haven't been actually committed to Confluence yet. And that's when you start to get this great content blitz where people are starting to say, hey, we never completed the release notes for this product, or there's been a change in the way that we handle support on a specific product or project. Let's get some pages updated and published. And usually with those, you wind up retiring the older versions of the page, or pages that are no longer relevant. So that, plus if you're on, if you have analytics, so to look through each space admin, should be using space analytics. It's for sure if you're on premium, to look at what's going on in the space, which pages are the ones that are hit frequently. Those are the ones that you really want to make sure have an owner and that they're remaining updated, because you oftentimes in your organization can have people going to pages that are stale and they don't realize it. Particularly new hires, I find this with. You wind up with a new hire and they start asking questions like, yeah, we have a Confluence page for that. Go look at the page. But everyone else sort of has their tribal knowledge of what's changed since that page got published, but no one's committed the changes to the page. So they're working under a separate set of rules because they know, like, pay attention to A, B, and D, but ignore C. But that new hire keeps thinking that C is an integral part of it and doesn't realize that it has to be taken out. So this is a good time to go through it and say, hey, you know what, a lot of this has changed. But they're not looking at it because they've committed it to memory, or it's just become muscle memory or rote for them at this point. They don't need the Confluence page anymore because they know it well enough, but they also know what's changed and the incremental changes that have happened without committing that change back to Confluence. So it's a perfect time to go through that and give everyone an opportunity to get their hands on it. And I like to use it as an opportunity to take people who are newer to the organization and get them to become content contributors, where a lot of people come to the organization, they're real consumers. They're just going through pages, through spaces, learning about projects, past, present, potentially future, but they're not really committing anything. Then you identify a gap and you can assign it to them and say, okay, this is your opportunity to not just be a consumer, but a contributor to our Confluence space. Put together the page. What I like to do internally by us is I like to have sort of content champions, which are people who everyone should just worry about committing the information to a page. You don't have to know every macro. You don't have to know every way to edit a page, whether or not you're going to center or use bullet points or use expands. Get the information there and then have a content champion that can jump in and say, here's the content today. It's just, text on a page. Here's how we're going to make it engaging. And then they work through it with that creator to teach them the different tools that exist in Confluence to make those pages pop. And it gives you that opportunity to really take could be a chore and turn it into a learning opportunity for everybody.
That's great. That's terrific. Robert had a question in the chat. Is there a way for admins to look at pages that are in draft, like pages that haven't been saved in Confluence? Do we have that tool?
In the page tree, you should, as an admin, you should see any pages that have a draft lozenge next to them. I would share my space, but there's unfortunately some proprietary information there. You should be able to see the drafts. The truth is, though, I'm not sure if that's limited to the page owner or if the space admin sees that as well. Right. Not every user in a space will see draft. They'll see their drafts, but seeing others' drafts, I'll have to look back and see. I'm not sure if the space admin can see it. Let's go to the space settings. And then manage content. So
I think I remember it being under manage content, but it's been a minute since I was a space admin, and things change rapidly.
It's been longer than a minute for myself, so I don't quite remember if space admins have that power. And
they may have had it before or not had it before, and it may have changed too. So
yeah.
My issue is I'm an org admin, so I don't even it's very difficult for me to know what a space admin might see because I'm already on top of that. So
yeah. All right. Well, another thing that I like to do in Confluence, and Andy, you mentioned has it been updated recently? Does it need to be updated, or can it be archived? But there's a third possibility, which is that it hasn't been updated in a while and it's evergreen. So something like a glossary reference doesn't need to be updated every year, but it is evergreen. It's not, it doesn't get changed that often. So and that's a great use, by the way, for tags. You can put a tag on it that says evergreen, and it's like, hey, this is a reference that we're just going, we know doesn't get updated nearly as often as other things. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's out of date, right? Attachments on pages, I look at those quite a bit, especially if they're like large videos of a demo of a product that isn't there anymore. Like that might be something you could remove or archive, right? I saw Rodney shaking his head at that one.
A previous org was a heavy user of video clips for bug reports, for demos, for just general get the information out there. And it became a problem on our Confluence where we were constantly trying to figure out what to do with all this space we were using. This was Confluence data center, so we had to manage the hard drive space quite literally. And it's like, well, we don't have a YouTube or something like that we can put this on because these are pre-release stuff. This is something we don't want to share, but Confluence is not a great YouTube.
Yeah. Yep. I actually have a library of product demos that I've accumulated at my workplace, and I'm gonna have to go through this, pretty soon, of looking at, all right, this was a demo of a product. Does that product still exist? If it doesn't exist anymore, we don't need that video. That's an attachment that we can remove, we can delete it, and we can and we let that hard drive space get freed up. But yeah, it's definitely a concern, especially when you have larger and larger spaces and instances and more people involved. And if the culture of the company is we all take a video of something, that gets exponential.
And it's not like video sizes are shrinking any. I mean, 4K video, even a short clip, takes significant space.
Yes, definitely.
And that definitely affects your, like, just the performance, particularly pages with huge amounts of attachments on them will load so much slower. People will think it's a system issue. It's really not a system issue. It's the fact that you've got junk drafts. And one thing that I know that we tell our users to avoid is we have a lot of pages that are just copied over many times. Let's say meeting notes that are on a weekly meeting, and they just copy over that meeting note to keep a lot of the history there, but create a new day. So they have, let's say, today was the 21st. We met today. We're going to meet next week. So we copy that meeting agenda, publish the agenda for the 28th. So now you have copies of it. But every time you copy, you're copying all the attachments with it. So if you have you have the pages that you're even if it's not videos, and you let's say have embedded images or Excel sheets, like at a certain point, you've just propagated that so many times that it's going to impact the performance of your instance.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that when they delete it from appearing in the Confluence page, it didn't delete the attachment itself. Right. That's a really good point. So there's another place where you can, remove things. Also, that's another opportunity there for doing a best practice of use templates instead of having people copy the same document over and over again, right? But of course, then you also need to teach your users use the template, not the copy, right? So that can be, and for some reason that's really hard for people. I don't know why. I don't know why it's easier for them to copy a page than it is to create a new page from a template, but there's a lot of users have a mental block there for sure. Yeah.
So one thing that might help people out is there have been some recent changes and for Confluence Cloud where there are now smart values that are tied to the automation for Confluence that include last viewed, and so you can really get fancy with that and get an idea of the last time pages were viewed. So something that's hasn't been changed and hasn't been viewed in a long time could be something that is that you can reevaluate and see, okay, do we really need this or not?
Yep. Good target for archiving. Also, and this goes for both Jira and Confluence, as part of spring cleaning, it's a great time to look at your add-ons and apps and decide, do we need to be paying for that? Is that the right tool for the job? Is anybody using this? And take a look at those and see, because and this is one of those things where it's like, hey, I'm spending, a week, of my time cleaning up Confluence or cleaning up Jira. Oh, and hey, and I report that to my boss, and then I say, and by the way, I saved us, $2,000 this year just by removing, 2 apps. Okay, well that's worthwhile. And my boss is like, "Oh, okay, thank you. That's something, your time was well spent. All right," and they like that's a thing that can be beneficial. I think controlling costs isn't something we talk nearly enough about as Jira admins, but it's something that if I have the opportunity to, target something that's like, that's no longer in use, we're not, we don't necessarily need that. I mean, take a look at it, see it. Is it something we can remove? And should I start asking around, like, hey, is anybody using this? I know I've worked at least one organization that said, oh yeah, if nobody in this room can identify that we're using that, turn it off until somebody yells.
Yeah, I think
The
along the
classic
same lines as controlling costs is basically if you're doing spring cleaning and controlling costs, you're going to have to make sure that your user counts are up to date. That the guy that the manager that left isn't still occupying a license. So
right. Thankfully, I think a lot of people now are using single sign-on for provisioning, so that helps a lot with those licenses to manage those. When it's like, when that person's account got deactivated, there we go, right? Ronnie, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, even with single sign-on, it's not bulletproof. I've been in organizations where one department decided that it needed this group in the SSO provisioning for Jira, and they didn't consult us. They went around the admin team to get this added and went directly to the ADO team and got it added to the directory, and it ended up blowing out our license. So definitely, it's always a good idea to keep it on, but don't trust that just because you have single sign-on that it's a solved problem.
Right. Right. And as part of spring cleaning, also a good time to take a look at your user groups, your permission schemes, all of that. Make sure that those are where you want them to be. Right. Yeah. Yeah. The user count can, there's something that that's a real force multiplier. Right. once you hit that next tier, it's like, oh, great. Now it's even more. Yeah.
So we do user, what should we call it? We inspect our users. We validate them when we get our estimated bill 3 days before the billing date. It's always a trigger for myself and our, although I'm an org admin, I really specialize in the Confluence side. We have another org admin who specializes in the Jira side. The two of us will go through and see, who no longer needs a license, who left the organization and we weren't told by IT to disable them, right? So you get that estimated bill and then you actually see what your actual is. And I don't think there's a month that has passed that we have not disabled users because they weren't in the organization anymore, or they were in a different part of the organization. And there are certain parts of our organization that don't have access to Jira or Confluence just because those teams have chosen not to use the tools as a team. So we don't create users for them because why pay for someone who decides to sign in once but never visit again?
Right.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of a use it or lose it policy. If you during those audits, Andy was talking about, and you see someone has not logged into Jira or Confluence in 6 months, reclaim that license. They're obviously not using it. That definitely needs to be paired with a sign-on provisioning. Sorry, the term just escaped me, but provision them as they sign on. So when they do come back, when they do have a need for it, they're not roadblocked all of a sudden. But if they're not using it, no reason to have them sit on a license that you could use for someone who does need it.
Yep.
We find this very often with consultants that are given licenses because they're part of a project. So let's say they're in Jira and they're part of it. They're a consultant on a team, maybe a UX or UI developer or designer that comes into the team as a replacement, not a full-time employee of ours, and they're given a license, and then they finish that project, and nobody ever says, "Oh, this person's done." They were never an employee that you would have audited them from an employee standpoint. But they are someone who was actively using Confluence or Jira for that time period, and then they're gone. So really knowing who they are, and then using that as an opportunity to train people on, like, potentially, public pages, right? Or using guests rather than single space guests, rather than inviting a user who's going to absorb cost and licensing. Those are also good things to go through if you're not doing them like we are on a monthly basis. When we look at our bill, do them at least annually or semi-annually, so people and again, that might not be the type of savings you want to present to your director of IT or whoever is responsible for the spend, because it just looks like you've been lazy, or hey, how come this guy's had access for 6 months when he hasn't even been working with us, right? But at the end of the day, it does cut down on that cost.
I mean, ultimately, somebody didn't tell you that person had left, so right. Welcome, Jasmine. You kind of snuck in here a bit ago, but I just wanted to say welcome to the talk. We're really just talking about different things that we do in our spring cleaning and auditing, kind of on a annual, semi-annual maintenance kind of basis. So if you have anything to add, if you feel like unmuting, you can, or if you just want to type it in chat, that's cool too. So let's see. Oh, okay. Jasmine's got table tennis going on in the background, so that's fair. That's fair. Any other things we want to talk about for those cleanup tasks that we tackle? Outdated automations, something that I sometimes have to go in and dig in and get rid of. If you're in an organization with advanced roadmaps, oh my God, the plan proliferation, right? So that's another one and those are fun because there isn't really an archive feature. That's just go in and remove it. So, yeah.
Going back to automation for a moment, that's really important now because those, for most people, those automations now have hard limits, and they don't fail gracefully. When you run out of that for the month, you are done. And anything you are depending on to function, you have to go back and fix now.
Yep.
It's usually you as the admin who has to go back and fix it. So definitely keep an eye if the automation is sitting there, it's not really being useful, but it's taking up usage count and all that. Redirect those resources to something that'd be more useful to people.
Yeah, and I find that with automations in particular, um, more often than annual is a good idea for exactly that reason. You know, if you're coming up on your limit, or you just see that there's a lot, because there's a lot of things that you'll get, you know, fire off an email when this happens. You know what? That didn't have to be an automation necessarily. Sometimes that could have been, you know, my favorite is filter subscriptions, right? You could have had that as a filter subscription instead of an automation, you know. And again, when you're talking about removing users, that's another one that you have to look at is, did that user own filters that now are orphaned?
Hmm.
Go fix that.
But we go
Cool.
back to the you were saying about add-ons, the yell tests, turn it off, see who yells about it. Usually I
Yeah.
find the same thing with those automations. If automation was truly bringing value and a person who owns it leaves, you will hear about it quickly.
Right.
If it's been a couple of weeks or a couple of months and you have not heard anything, and this automation has been sitting there failing consistently, it's really time to ask, is this providing value? And if not, can we redirect those resources?
Yep. Kind of feel like, even though I said this is spring cleaning, I feel like if you needed to sort of spread it out, it's almost like you could do one of these areas each month throughout the year. Be like, you know, May is for automation. Go through your automations, you know. Maybe you do users every month, like you were saying, with right before Andy was saying, you know, right before the month's end. But you know, maybe, you know, custom fields are in June, and you know, you could set up a little calendar of when you go through those and clean things up in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Good maintenance practices. I mean,
Exactly.
better maintenance practices is to never get the cruft in there to begin with. But
I mean, that's the ideal, but meanwhile, everyone who's been an admin in the real world knows we have a ticket queue that's waiting on us and a bunch of projects, and the manager really wants the license count now down yesterday. And
right.
this new team needs training that you have to complete by the end of the week, and there's never enough time for the regular maintenance unless you make it a special project.
Right. Oh, that's actually, I did a project a few years ago at a place that I worked called the Bug Hunt, and this is, you know, we talked about archiving Jira projects, but a lot of teams will have things in their backlog that are outdated as well, you know, individual issues. And this organization I worked at, we did what was called the Bug Hunt, where every employee was, I went through, I did a search for all bugs and defects that that were more than like 6 months old. If it had been reported in the last 6 months, I believed that it still existed. But if it was more than 6 months old, I was like, I don't even know. Did we fix this? Is it possible we fixed this and didn't even know it? Was it a duplicate bug? Did we fix it while we were fixing something else, right? And I divided the number of bugs. And I think we had, I want to say it wasn't even that many. I think it was like 200 or 300 bugs. And I just divided it up by the number of people in the company, and everybody got like 10 bugs to work on. And it was just, gave them all instructions on how do you recreate the, you know, reproduce the bug. And all they had to do was go and reproduce the bug. If you could verify that it existed, you gave that bug a tag and left it. Don't worry about it. But if you could not reproduce it, we would close it as not reproducible. And if it was something where it was like it was in the description of the bug, it was like, yeah, this is hard to reproduce. Like we already know that it's, specific to this OS and this particular issue, and it requires the API access and all of this. Then it was like, all right, we're gonna that's the high hanging fruit of something that is really hard for us to recreate. And we sent those to our QA specialist because we're like, hey, you know, we're gonna verify the ones that are, you know, pretty easy to verify, and it's just time consuming. But you get the thing that requires you to actually think and figure out how to recreate it. In the course of doing that, I think we cut down. I think we managed to close something like 60 or 70% of the bugs that we had open just from that.
That's brilliant. I will add a note of warning from my own experience. We had PMO tried to do something similar, but they published the list of bugs publicly and included the current assignee on those bugs on that list. And HR was not happy.
Like when you say publicly, like the general public?
No, publicly, like within the company.
Oh, yeah, no, we published that within the company as like, who's been assigned to test it, but
Not
it wasn't
assigned to test it, assigned to fix it and haven't yet. They took the list of old bugs that just need to be verified. It wasn't even, we need to fix these are old bugs. No, it's like, we need to verify these still exist. They put a master list out on a Confluence page, blasted out to all the developers saying, hey, check out this Confluence page, just grab a few off the list and test them when you get a chance, remove them when you do. And because they had the current assignee listed on the page, someone complained to HR, and HR came back and said, yeah, don't do that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't think we actually assigned them. We just like in Jira, like using the assignee, we just told people which ones they were going to work on. It gave them a list,
I,
basically. Yeah, but that's a really good
I
point.
still think it's a fantastic practice, and I think the person who complained was probably being a little bit overly sensitive and saying more about how they felt about their performance than anything else. But because Jira was involved, I was still brought in on all this. I'm
Right,
like, I didn't even have anything to do with this exercise. I'm just here to keep the system up.
right. Yeah, yeah, I could see that. I could see that. I think it also partly depends on like how your organization views, you know, assignments, and whether that
Mhm.
plays into a culture of, transparency or a culture of cover your butt, right? And this particular organization was highly transparent, and the bug hunt, like our CEO was he participated as well. It was top down, everybody at all layers. So it was very
Mhm.
democratic that way.
I'm trying to be careful about naming organizations because my LinkedIn is very public, and I have worked for some very big names, and very big names, very many lawyers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But that should tell you all you need to know about their regular transparency right there.
It seems like the bigger they are, the harder that is culturally
Mhm.
to embrace. We'll just put it that way.
Yep.
So, cool. Well, yeah. So that was another little spring cleaning thing to do. We didn't do that every year. I think we pretty much tried to do that like every other. But I know also like other organizations I've been in basically say 6 months from the time the bug is created, if it hasn't been touched, just close it. Or or even like features and issues like, enhancements and user stories. If nobody's been able to work on it in 6 months, it's probably not relevant anymore. So depending on what your development cycle is like and how long it takes an organization to do that, that can be a way to kind of streamline as well. Andy has another use case.
Yeah, it just dawned upon me, and I took a look, and my suspicions were right. How many of us deactivate users that leave an organization? We all do. Well, the last 2 years, Confluence has created personal spaces for every new user.
Oh,
You know how many spaces exist in your instance for a user that's no longer, when you deactivate a user, it does not delete or archive their space. It stays ownerless, but it stays. And as a admin, you could go in and search for those sort of orphan spaces and get rid of them. I'm looking right now at a space list for personal spaces in my organization. And without even having to scroll off the first screen, I see 4 people that we just need to go and archive those spaces. And that's, again, it's a big hit to your instance, the storage, performance. And in particular, you may have people who created important content in spaces, personal spaces, and never made it out. It's a good idea in general when you're doing this cleanup to ask people to take a look at your personal space. Have you created content there that you intended to move out into a regular space? Because prior to having drafts, that's how a lot of people handled, right? They would just create content in their own space, and like when it was ready or they thought it was perfect, they would commit it. Now with drafts, they don't do it as often, but people still go back to their own personal spaces to do it. So it's a great place to look for content that may need to be shared or archived.
That's a really good point. At one point, I did exactly that. I went through and archived a bunch of personal spaces, and at the time, Confluence didn't really have an archive space feature yet. So our method of archiving was to export the space, and then I just uploaded the export file to Dropbox that was owned by the company. It's just okay, one of the lead developers for the organization had left and was there's some stuff in here that's useful. There's, developer documentation that you might need later. You probably won't. It's okay to archive it, but I don't want us to throw it away just in case, right? Just in case there's some down the road, you've got to audit the code or something, we'll have it. And with all of the spaces that I had to archive at that point, and this was not a large organization, at all, less than 100 people. It was several gigabytes of Confluence pages and data, and I was like, wow. and also, I will say this: removing those spaces is also nice for the people, the former employees, because I had somebody reach out to me 2 years after I left a company that I'd only worked at for less than a week. And he's like, "Hey, I just found your Confluence page." I'm like, "My what now?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm working at such and such." I was like, "Oh, right. I worked there for a minute." You probably don't want to tell them that you know me because I wasn't there for very long, But yeah, it was great. Great. It wasn't they didn't fire me or anything. It was just other things happened in my life. So all right. Well, we are coming up on 6:20. And does anybody have any other things they want to talk about in terms of spring cleaning, maintenance, those kind of topics? Suggestions, ideas, takeaways, things you're like, that was the best idea ever. I'm totally going to steal that. I'm so glad that we're recording this, by the way.
I liked your idea of the bug hunt. I think there's something that we could do to help gamify the cleanup system internally, both on Jira, the Jira side and the Confluence side, not to overly reward people for just archiving content that is important to stay, but potentially even in like Confluence, just thinking about it now, you start watching a space and then you challenge a team to go through and archive, and you get X amount of points for archiving, you get X amount of points for building a new page at the time of this bug hunt, right? Or whatever we'll call it, not bug necessarily, but content hunt. Update up, you give points for updates, you give points for archiving, and you give points for net new creation, right? And you see who on the team gets the most and have some sort of gamified way of rewarding them for helping to contribute to a cleaner space, right? Something I definitely want to work on. I think I build a Confluence page for it.
Yeah, I did I think I had a Confluence page or a dashboard for it when I was doing it. And I had like a pie chart that showed, everybody's number of bugs that they were assigned. And I had another pie chart that showed, the the number of bugs that had actually been tested yet versus the total number that we had. Not even, ones that had been tested and passed or tested and failed, like just were they tested? I don't I was like, I'm indifferent as to whether or not we close any. All I care about is that you actually test them. Right. But yeah, gamifying it, making it visual really helped. Yeah. And it was a good experience, and it was a short amount of time. It was like 2 or 3 weeks, right? So it wasn't even a full month. It was just like, hey, everybody's going to dedicate a certain amount of time to this in the next, 2, 3 weeks and go for it. I want to say we had like one person, maybe two, who had a couple of bugs that they were like, I don't know enough about our system to test this. And I probably can't learn it in that amount of time. And so there were like just a few that we had to kick around to someone who had more experience with it. But for the most part, it was it's a consumer facing product, so it was a little bit easier for people to interact with anyway. But yeah. Jasmine asked, is there something similar for Confluence to the recently updated macro? And and Robert responded that this is in our chat here, that there are smart values in Confluence. And we were talking earlier, Jasmine, before you got on, that one of them is like last seen, like last time somebody visited a Confluence page. And there's probably a last time it was updated as well. I think that's a meta. Yeah, the recently updated dashboard macro. Yeah, last seen is what you need. Great, perfect. All right. So one of the things I'd like to let y'all know about before we wrap up, Tuesday, March 26th, is the beginning of Adobe Summit here in Las Vegas. As you know, this is the Las Vegas Ace. And we are going to have an in-person event. So if you're in town that week for the Adobe Summit, come to the Chica restaurant at the Venetian at 7:30, and we're going to have an in-person event. So it will be great. And I always love it when Atlassian buys me a drink. So it's going to be kind of a mixer, a little bit of talky, but mostly getting to know each other. So does anybody have anything that they want to close with? I will close with this with this question. What is your number one takeaway from this little chat today? The one thing you're gonna do sometime between now and summer as your spring cleaning that maybe new or you hadn't thought about it.
I think the private spaces is definitely something that needs to have a closer look taken at.
Great, excellent. Yeah, clean up those private spaces. Yep.
Yeah, I'm with Rodney on that. I mean, I've archived over 30 since I said it. I've been listening the whole time. Don't worry. But I'm just going through and just seeing, looking at what the space tree looked like before versus now, just to be able to navigate it. And people should be able to find like actual people with content versus looking at a historical reminder of everyone that's worked for us over the last 6 years. Yeah, I think that's my takeaway. And then I think gamifying the cleanup somehow, maybe starting with a smaller team. I'm thinking maybe my Canadian team, who's sort of like a jack of all trades type of team. So they don't have separate spaces for everything. They have one space for all of the Canada product. Starting with them as a proof of concept to see if we could run something, maybe, give it a week's time, like you said, Stephanie, time cap it, and then put in, rules and have dashboards built to be able to track it and see if it has an uptick. And then if it does, use that as a way to evangelize it in the rest of the organization.
Great. And in the chat, Jasmine said that she liked the idea of implementing the cleaning schedule with, one area of cleanup per month. So just spread that out throughout the year. I mean, for Jasmine, who is in Australia, this is actually fall cleanup, so it's fair. And Robert, you have anything? What's your takeaway?
My takeaway was gamifying the bug hunt, but I think that other things could be gamified, just like Annie mentioned. I also like kind of spreading it out, like what Jasmine is suggesting, because I kind of equate it to flossing. I mean, it's something that we should be doing, not just in the spring, but throughout.
Definitely. I think for me, the automations is one of the areas ripe for cleanup. And I don't necessarily admin a whole lot of projects right now, but being able to streamline that is definitely, that's one of those areas where it's like, yeah, we could clean some stuff up there for sure. Yep. So
Yeah,
that's my takeaway.
There's a lot of things that have a lot of things that have like inherent deadlines. And he was mentioning like before the monthly bill comes, not only is that useful for like double checking your users, but it also is useful for double checking your automation usage and seeing how close you are to your limits. So
yep, for sure. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here tonight and for participating in our little roundtable chat on things you can do to clean up your Jira and Confluence instances. Great talk. Love the advice, the suggestions, and thanks for being here. Bye.
Bye.